Hello, welcome back to the channel. It is Dan, Nocturne Knives, coming at you today with a first impressions video for this knife, the Demko AD-20.5. I got this in for sharpening from a wonderful customer, Matthew. Thank you very much, Matthew. Absolutely appreciate the support. Thank you very much. And this is an interesting knife, definitely getting a lot of buzz since its release, 2 years ago, something like that, year ago, who remembers, but it's definitely an interesting knife, very popular, and thought I'd go ahead and make a video about it, get my thoughts out there. So this is the scaled down version of the Demko AD-20, a knife made by John and Andrew Demko in the United States. It's a high-end small batch production, mid-techy kind of thing. I don't know, whatever you want to call that. It sits around the $400 to $600 price range, right in there. And it's quite a large knife, and it's also very difficult to get your hands on because it's a small shop and they do fairly low volume production, and it's a very popular knife. So they made the AD-20.5, which is a scaled down version of that knife, and it's made in Taiwan. So these are definitely more available and coming in at a much lower price point, about $150 for the base version. Now this is upgraded with, I believe these are original GOAT titanium scales. I'll try and find that out for sure, leave a link in the description, maybe put something on screen if I remember. We'll see what happens in the editing process. We'll jump into some size and specs real quick to start it off with. Overall length, we're looking at right about 7.5 inches. Overall blade length coming in right at 3 inches, and cutting edge length is about 2.75, something like that, maybe 2.8, a bit under 3 inches. Take a look at the handle dimensions. Thickness is right around 0.4. Blade stock thickness coming in at 1/8 of an inch, 0.12. Cutting edge thickness, definitely on the chunky side, looking at about 29 thousandths, 30 thousandths. We round those fives up. So yeah, definitely thicker knife in terms of the grind. Oh, and this one is the AUS 10A version. I have two knives laying around here that will make decent size comparisons. These are both in from customers for sharpening. Got a pair of 3 wearing Cerberus scales, and then a Benchmade mini Crooked River. Line all 3 of these up on the pivot. You can see they're all about in the same size range. The Demko is coming in a bit shorter than the pair of 3 with these Cerberus scales. I think a regular pair of 3 is probably going to be about the same length. In terms of blade length, almost exactly the same as the pair of 3, and just slightly more cutting edge. So let's get into these first impressions, talk about my likes, neutrals, and dislikes. So my first like is kind of the idea behind this knife. I like that they made this knife. They had a very successful model with the AD-20 and then said, let's scale this down, make it a little more carryable, and then make it much more available and at a lower price point. So make it in Taiwan, make it a smaller knife, make it a thinner knife. More people can carry it more easily, and it will actually be available to buy most of the time. I like that idea. Next, the aesthetics. I like the way this knife looks. I like the way it's finished. The stonewash is really nice. I love a smooth, silky stonewash like this. I think the lines look really good, especially with the shark's foot. The shark's foot is a really nice looking blade, in my opinion. I think it's a great blade, and also a great blade shape. There's my next like, is going to be this blade shape. I think it's going to be great for most EDC tasks. You have just a slight belly, dropped very low tip, so it's easy to make utility cuts like this. You barely have to raise up, and you're engaging with the tip. There. Say you're cutting on a flat surface, you barely have to raise, and you're engaging with that tip. So it's going to be good for a lot of utility type cuts. A lot of the benefits of a Wharncliffe, but just a little bit of curve in that edge. And then my next like is going to be the ergonomics in the saber grip, specifically with your thumb up here on the blade. This is a really nice grip to be in, and also choked up here. These two grips are really good. I like those grips a lot. This handle locks your fingers in really well. This generous scallop here fits your pointer finger. Your other three land on this swell and these depressions. Super nice, at least for my hand size. It works really well. Your thumb lands perfectly here on this jimping, which is sharp, but not too aggressive, I would say. Pretty well done jimping. And then you can easily choke up here. This is kind of a half choil, but you can easily fit a finger here, and you have a little bit of distance from that cutting edge fight. So I think you'd be safe up here doing delicate or finer tasks. You can also get a finger up here towards the tip. Your middle finger can kind of land in this choil, and you have a lot of control at that tip to do utility, fine cutting tasks, stuff like that. And then my next like will be the multiple deployment options. I always love a knife with multiple deployment options, and this one has several. The most obvious of which is this big hole in the blade. You can use that for a middle finger spidey flick. You could also slow roll with your thumb like that. Next, you have the big thumb studs here, which are super easy to thumb flick. You can also middle finger flick off of those without too much trouble, just like that. And then you have this shark lock, which is really easy to flip the blade open and closed with. And then my next like is going to be the feeling of the lock and the engagement and disengagement. It feels incredibly nice. Disengage that lock, and just the way the spring and the metal and the blade all interact together, that disengagement feels amazing. It's really easy, like it's dead simple to disengage. Open and closing is absolutely dead simple, and it feels really nice. You get a good mechanical feeling from this lock, which is fun. Now onto my neutrals. I have two neutrals. So first is going to be this pocket clip. It's kind of just an uninteresting pocket clip. It's decent. You can see carry is going to be just a little bit shallow here. You're going to have about that much of the knife sticking up out of your pocket, and also the clearance here at the front is a little bit low, so you might struggle to get into some pants, although I think once you get it over the lip, it will accommodate plenty of pants under here. So I'm kind of not crazy about the clip. Do I hate it? No, but I think it can be improved. It could carry a little bit deeper, maybe if it sat up here, turn this lanyard hole into a second screw, make it sit up here, only have about that much of the knife sticking out of your pocket. I think that's an improvement. And then my next neutral is going to be the blade to handle ratio. It's a little bit low on this knife. Blade to handle, you're coming in 3 inches of blade with about 4.5 inches of handle. So the ratios are a little bit off, and the cutting edge is even a little bit shorter than the blade length. So it's a little bit massive handle, tiny blade, kind of reminiscent of the Para 3. Do I hate that? No, I don't mind it particularly, but they definitely could have squeezed more blade into this handle with some better internal engineering in there. You can see how short the blade comes up. You rearrange the situation with a backspacer, and you could push that blade out quite a lot. Maybe get rid of this lanyard hole. So those are my neutrals. Now onto my dislikes, and I do have several dislikes for this knife. So my first dislike is kind of the elephant in the room. It's the price. This knife is just too expensive in its base form, coming in at $150 for FRN and Austin blade steel. I think the value is missing there. If this was coming in at $100, I think that would be a stellar value. $125, decent. $150, I think that's way too high of a price for this knife in its base form. Now, to be fair, it's coming from a small company. Demko is a small company. These knives are made generally very well, and it is a new and unique lock design. So I kind of get the price, but at the same time, I wish it was lower. I think it should be lower. Now, next dislike is going to be this blade. I like the shape a lot, but everything else about it is kind of meh. The steel, Austin, very uninteresting, pretty low performance steel. I think we can do a lot better, especially for the price. and then the grind is just really thick, coming in at nearly 30 thousandths behind the edge. And I did sharpen this. It's been sharpened one time. That's just really thick. I think these are coming in well over 25 thousandths from factory. We can check out the edge. I did this on my Edge Pro, finished it to about on my 700 grit CBN stone, and it came out absolutely screaming sharp. It's at about 18 degrees per side. Here you go. And that's pretty close to what it was from factory. It was very uneven from factory, but averaged to about 18 degrees. You can see just no resistance going through this phone book paper. Edge came out absolutely beautifully. But anyway, as I was saying, the blade, too thick behind the edge, nearly 30 thousandths. Does not need to be that thick, especially on such a small knife. There's nothing you're doing with a knife this small that really demands a 30 thousandths blade thickness behind the edge. So I think that thickness behind the edge should be halved, 15 thousandths, and this thing is epic. Even with 10A, it's going to be an epic slicer. That would make this a lot better. My next dislike is going to be the detent on this. So the Shark Lock is a really cool lock in its disengagement and how it works and its strength, but its downfall is its lack of detent. It's kind of like the Axis Lock in that, but I think the Shark Lock is even weaker. So you can see it just, like, it's this slow, gradual detent like you have on an Axis Lock. There's no detent ball where it's a break, like say on a Para 3 or really any normal knife. Here's my TW Price where it has that detent break, that hard break. So you flick it and it flies open. On this, it's just that soft detent, Axis kind of detent. And I don't love it. It makes it a little bit difficult to deploy, especially with the slot. You have to get that middle finger flick just right. It's very easy to fail the middle finger flick. Now, thumb flick off the thumb stud is super easy because the action on this is pretty good. But to flick off the slot, it takes a pretty hard flick or get a little bit of wrist involved, just a little flip of your wrist and get out there, but I don't love the detent on this. Now, next dislike is going to be the bearings. This thing has tiny, tiny ass bearings. You obviously can't see them in here, but take my word for it, they're tiny. The bearings themselves are like 1 millimeter or half a millimeter or something like that. They're tiny, tiny, and there are a bunch of them. I'll include a link to the Skiff bearings for these because Skiff had to make a special kind of bearing to fit these because they're so tiny. So I don't love that. Just use a standard size bearing. I think you'd have better action than with a bunch of tiny little bearings. Like, you can see it's pretty good, but it could be much better than this on regular bearings, I think. And then my next and final dislike is going to be the ergonomics of the Shark Lock. One of my likes was the saber grip, but that's really, in my opinion, the only grip that this knife is really comfortable in, and it's because of the Shark Lock. The Shark Lock, it just gets right in the way of so many grips, and it's also really, really sharp. I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but this thing is not chamfered at all. None of these edges are relieved. It's very sharp. This jimping is sharp, but mostly these edges are super sharp. So in this grip, it works because the Shark Lock is underneath your thumb and all the pressure is going into your thumb. You go with any other grip, say hammer grip, Shark Lock, poking right into the top of your hand there. And if you're bearing into something, all that pressure is pushing the Shark Lock into your hand right there. And so the Shark Lock just kind of stabs up into this web of your hand, gets really annoying, especially if you were to go and do any kind of twist motion or lateral pressure. You're just going to be catching the edges of this shark lock. And then same thing, if you go for a pinch grip, a standard pinch grip, you land directly on the shark lock and it just pokes up into your finger. And I love the pinch grip. It's one of my favorite grips, but it just doesn't work on this knife. If you were to do it, you'd have to come up here onto the blade, and the shark lock is still poking into your fingers right there. So really annoying. Draw cut grip kind of works, although the handle's not really set up for it. Draw cut pinch grip, you're really just grabbing the shark lock, so that's not great. You could disengage it potentially, and it's also just really sharp. So I think the shark lock deployment and retraction wise is good. It's got a lot of utility in that way, but ergonomically, I think it's a big miss. It's hard to have locks that are on the back of a knife here on the back of the handle, because that's where your hand wants to go. And when you cut into things, that's where the pressure goes, is onto the back of the knife, especially in this area. Now contrast that with something like a frame lock, where you go in a hammer grip and all the pressure is pushing back this flat part of the back of the handle, and the pressure isn't on this lock. So it doesn't matter really how the lock is shaped here. You start putting a lock on the back of a handle, and now suddenly it's interfering ergonomically. And that's my biggest gripe with the shark lock, is I think ergonomically it's a big miss. And those are all my dislikes there. So with all that, let's come into some conclusions. So this knife, honestly, I'm not a massive fan of it. I can't get into it. I think it looks good. I think the face of it, the design, is really good. The idea of the shark lock is great. It's very strong. It's extremely easy to use. One of the easiest to use locks I've ever used. You just pull it and the blade falls shut. It has a nice self-close, super easy to use, very user-friendly. The ergonomics in the saber grip, really good. The handle obviously is made to fit your hand, and it does that really well. I like the blade shape. Aesthetically, it's good. Where it misses is the blade is too thick, and then the shark lock ergonomically is a total loss for me. And also, kind of with that detent issue, that soft detent, I think I could get over that if it was like ergonomically awesome. But it's such an ergonomic pain. Like anywhere you want to put your thumb that isn't right on this jimping just doesn't work. And this jimping is good, but if you're cutting into something thicker, your thumb is going to sometimes be hitting that stuff. You want to move your thumb back. The only place to put it is way back here on the shark lock, so you're kind of weirdly positioned. I want to put it right here a lot of the time, but that just doesn't work. Hammer grip, pinch grip just don't work because the shark lock is in the way and really sharp. If it was better chamfered, those might be more comfortable, but still it's totally in the way of something like a pinch grip. And even if it was chamfered better, it would still be sticking up into that pinch grip. So I think ergonomically, the shark lock is a really big miss, and so I really don't like it much for that reason. Those are my final thoughts about the Demko AD-20.5. Oh, and these tie scales, definitely like them. I'm not a huge FRN fan. These tie scales make the knife feel much better, much more premium. They do add cost and weight, of course, but I think it's ultimately worth it if you really like your AD-20.5 in its stock form and want some tie scales. These seem to be made pretty well. They feel nice in hand. They're well chamfered and everything. So a good option here. Yeah, go drop a comment down below if you have an AD-20.5 or you don't have one. I would love to know why you do or don't. Any of your thoughts about it. Would love to hear all those. Always love to hear your thoughts in those comments down below. While you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe button if you like knives, sharpening content, all that kind of stuff. Would definitely appreciate it. Helps me out. And with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.